Shalom. We are looking today at chapter 18 of the Besorah of Yochanan. You will remember, although it's been a little while since chapter 17, that the conclusion of the chapter was Yeshua's prayer. O righteous Father, the world has not known you, but I have known you, and these have known you that sent me. And I have declared to them your name, and will declare it, that the love with which you loved me may be in them, and I in them. At this point, they have left the room where they celebrated Pesach, and Yeshua and his Talmidim have entered the garden. They are followed by Yehuda, accompanied by a detachment of Roman soldiers, as well as security officers of the Kohen Hagadol and the Prushim. Having crossed the Kidron, the wadi into which flowed the blood of the Pesach and other sacrifices, Yeshua and his Talmidim entered the garden they frequented when in Yerushalayim. The garden is not named by Yochanan, but it is called Gat Shamanim by Mattatyahu and Mark, and may have been a place in which Yeshua and his Talmidim sometimes even slept. Luke 21:37 notes that during Pesach week, Yeshua spent nights with his Talmidim on the Mount of Olives. Yeshua did not seek to hide, and thus was easily found by Yehuda and those accompanying him in a place that he was known to frequent. They came upon him with weapons as well as torches, although being 14 Nisan, the moon would have been full. They were prepared to search for and to arrest Yeshua with a great show of force, armed with swords and clubs. You have to ask, were they expecting armed resistance? Perhaps they were. Yeshua said to them, "Have you come out as against a robber, with swords and clubs to take me? I sat daily with you, teaching in the temple, and you did not seize me." A detachment of Roman troops is with Yehuda. This is a Greek word for a Roman cohort of 600 men. It could have been 1,000 men, made up of 250 cavalry and 760 infantry. Infrequently, the word is used for the detachment of men called a maniple, which had 200 men. But whether a larger number or a smaller number, 200 would still be quite a few. These men were from the battalion garrisoned at the Antonia fortress in Yerushalayim. Clearly, Yehuda and the Kohen Hagadol were fearful of Yeshua, misunderstanding his intentions and imagining that there would be a physical battle rather than a spiritual one. Yeshua, knowing precisely what would happen and how it would happen, politely asked the assembled troops and officials who they were seeking with their mass of armed men. It had been Yehuda's intention, along with those who came with him, to surprise Yeshua, which of course was impossible since he knew all things and he knew they were coming. Yeshua was ready. When they announced that they'd come for Yeshua of Nazareth, he replied simply, "I am." In Ivrit, ani, in Greek, ego, emi. The he has been added by translators. So he didn't say, "I am he." He said, "I am," which connects this statement to his previous statements in chapter 5, verse 8, and chapter 8, verse 12, and so on. It is rendered simply as the holy name of God in the Septuagint, the earliest Greek translation of the Tanakh from the original Hebrew, as in Shemot 3:14. Eyeh asher eyeh. Their reaction is worthy of note. They drew back and fell to the ground. Yeshua is in command of this situation, not Yehuda, not the Roman troops or the temple officials. Believing they had come to capture a recalcitrant troublemaker, they find instead someone of commanding presence. He's not trying to escape from them. He's actually displaying his power and majesty, making it obvious that he did not have to go with these men and could have escaped if he chose to do so. He asked them again, "Who are you seeking?" They simply repeat what they had said the first time, and he answered them that he has already told them he is the one they seek. Making this clear meant that none of his Talmudim were condemned with him or injured in the course of his arrest, that the saying might be fulfilled which he spoke, "Of those whom you gave me, I have lost none." He did not seek to avoid arrest, nor did he resist in any way, but only wanted to protect those that he loved. However, the words that he speaks demonstrate that he is the one in authority. "Let these go their way," he says, which mostly they did as quickly as they could, except for Shimon, who drew his sword. It would have not been uncommon for men to carry weapons, and cut off the ear of the Kohen Hagadol's servant Malchus from behind. The servant's name is mentioned only by Yochanan, again suggesting some connection with the Kohen Hagadol's household and knowledge beyond that of his fellows. Yeshua immediately told Shimon to put his sword away, making it clear to him that the future was in Hashem's hands and he was prepared for what was coming. Shimon was simply acting upon his promise to protect Yeshua. But his impulsive defense, far from aiding Yeshua, was likely to encourage his arrest also. The other Besorah writers do not mention Shimon by name, although the incident is noted. We are not told here that Yeshua miraculously restored Malchus' ear, but Luke notes this act, which probably helped to diffuse what was a volatile situation. The Roman commander, together with the officers of the temple security force, formally arrested Yeshua, and his hands were bound. Still bound, he was brought before Anan, the father-in-law of Caiaphas. Caiaphas was the current Kohen Hagadol and the leader who recommended the expediency of Yeshua's death, that one should die for many. Anan, who was previously Kohen Hagadol from 6 to 15 CE, had engineered the election of his son-in-law to this position. Clearly, the judgment of Yeshua had already been made. The decision was calculated with cynicism. The Talmud reports on this notorious family, "Woe to the house of Anan, woe to their servants Hiss. They are high priests, their sons are keepers of the treasury. Their sons-in-law are guardians of the temple, and their servants beat the people with staves." Shimon and Yochanan alone followed Yeshua to the house of the Kohen Hagadol, but Shimon remained by the door until brought in by Yochanan, called here the other Talmud. Undoubtedly, Shimon felt badly about his previous actions, and he wanted to demonstrate his loyalty and faithfulness to Yeshua. It is thought that Yochanan had a family connection to the Kohanim, perhaps through his father's business relationships. And thus, Yochanan had access where the other Talmudim would not have gained entrance. It was then that Shimon is noticed and the question is asked for the first time. A serving girl noticed Shimon as he stood near the door and rather sneeringly asked, "You're not one of that man's Talmudim, are you?" Yochanan was obviously known to be a Talmid of Yeshua, so she is asking if Shimon is one too. A simple question, easily answered yes. That was what was expected, but Shimon instead responded defensively, "I am not." Meanwhile, Yeshua was questioned, first by Anan about his beliefs, about his Talmudim, and about what he was teaching, hoping no doubt for something seditious or foolish. In response, Yeshua said, "I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues and in the temple. I didn't teach anything in secret, and it was no secret what I was teaching. So why do you ask me this now? Why don't you ask the people who heard me speak?" What Anan wanted was for Yeshua to identify those who were with him and what he falsely was teaching and in what way he was guilty of false teaching. Please note that at this point, Yeshua had not been formally charged with any crime, and no witnesses had been brought forward to speak against him. It would have been the prosecution's responsibility to provide both the accusation and the witnesses. Only when the prosecution has declared the charge can be made that a defense would be provided with evidence against the charge. But this was not a trial in any real sense, especially, and Anan held no official position. The basics of Jewish law were ignored in the case of Yeshua. According to the Talmud, Sanhedrin C4S1, criminal processes can neither commence nor terminate, but during the course of the day. If the person is acquitted, the sentence may be pronounced during that day. But if he is condemned, the sentence cannot be pronounced till the next day. But no kind of judgment is to be executed either on the eve of the Sabbath or on the eve of any festival. In response to Yeshua's brief statement, one of the officers slapped him. Obviously one of Anan's bully boys. And he declared, "You don't answer the Kohen Hagadol like that." Of course, officially, Anan was not Kohen Hagadol in any case. Yeshua responded, "If I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why do you strike me?" What had he said to justify physical abuse? At this point, Anan apparently realized nothing further would be accomplished, and he sent Yeshua, still bound like a dangerous criminal, to his son-in-law, the Kohen Hagadol, for an official trial. Watching from a safe distance, Shimon, meanwhile, was warming himself by the fire, attempting to blend in with the small crowd of onlookers, not wanting to be noticed. According to Luke's account, he could see Yeshua and perhaps was shocked by the way in which he was being treated. A servant of the Kohen Hagadol asked again in the negative, "You aren't also one of his Talmudim, are you?" And he emphatically declared, "I am not." Finally, yet another servant, a relative of the man whose ear Shimon had cut off, said, "Didn't I see you in the garden with him?" Malchus' relative would have noticed the man who attacked Malchus. He recognized Shimon. But Shimon denied knowledge of Yeshua a third time, this time with cursing, hoping to establish his credibility. Immediately, a rooster crowed, and Shimon remembered the words of Yeshua, acknowledging, no doubt, his own failure and faithlessness. The formal trial of Yeshua was in two parts. First, a rather hastily gathered council was convened, according to Matthew 26, and then the Sanhedrin met very early the next day, as described by Luke. Yochanan does not describe the events of either of these, only that when Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin were finished with Yeshua, he was taken in the early morning to the praetorium. None of them actually entered the praetorium, Pilate's military headquarters in Jerusalem, the Antonia fortress. To enter the court of the pagans would defile them, so they fastidiously refrained from entering, as it was Passover, although they had no problem condemning an innocent man to death on Passover. The chronology: it was lawful to eat the Pesach lamb any time between the evening of the Erev until the evening of the first day. So in that year, Thursday to Friday, on account of the huge number of lambs needing to be killed for that purpose and the necessity of eating the lamb immediately. At this point, Yeshua is brought before Pontius Pilate. Yochanan's focus is on this. As the religious leaders had no authority to put Yeshua to death, it is possible that they actually entered the praetorium and observed these events, however, that he actually did, Yochanan. Again, so as not to be defiled, Pilate went out to the leaders and asked of what Yeshua was being accused. And they said to him, "If he was not an evildoer, would we have delivered him to you?" They had already found him guilty. Philo's description of Pilate is this: his corruption, his acts of insolence, his rapine, his habit of insulting people, his cruelty, his continual murders of people, untried and uncondemned, and his never-ending, gratuitous, and most grievous inhumanity. Pilate is known historically as a cruel and ruthless man who would not have gained even his position, which is a minor position, except for the fact that he was married to Caesar Augustus' granddaughter. This, of course, suggests that they should judge Yeshua by their own law. He tells them this. You should judge Yeshua by your own law, because clearly the laws he's broken are not mine, they're yours. They had had his cooperation in arresting Yeshua, and now they made it clear to him what they expected. The religious leaders sometimes executed those they considered guilty without Roman permission by stoning, but only Yeshua's public execution would satisfy them now, fulfilling scripture and Yeshua's own words, "If I be lifted up." Yochanan combines two appearances of Yeshua before Pilate, separated by his appearance before Herod Antipas, which is described in Luke 23. Pilate hoped to shift his burden to Herod. Herod was the one who ruled Galilee, Yeshua's home. Herod, of course, sent Yeshua back to Pilate. Pilate asked Yeshua, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Yeshua asked, "Are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you this concerning me?" Pilate's response, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the Kohanim delivered you to me. What have you done?" Pilate had seen his share of belligerent rebels claiming to be kings. Josephus says anyone might make himself a king by putting himself at the head of a band of rebels whom he fell in with, speaking of the anarchy in Judea after Herod's death in 4 BC. He asked this question because Yeshua did not look like any of the revolutionaries that he had seen. He didn't look like a criminal. As is often the case, the answer to a question could depend on who was asking it. Thus, Yeshua wants to know who the question really comes from. If Pilate's asking for himself, this question is really about whether or not Yeshua saw himself as a political opponent to Caesar. But if he's asking for the Kohanim, the question might really be, do you consider yourself to be Mashiach? While as a Roman, Pilate was disinterested in Jewish religious views, he did understand that religious leaders wanted Yeshua executed. He wanted to know why. And at such a point, most of us would have undoubtedly launched into some sort of apologetic. But Yeshua was without wrongdoing of any kind before God or man. He healed the sick, he fed the multitudes, he raised the dead, and he taught powerfully about Hashem. He confronted corruption, and he served others selflessly. Yeshua could have said any or all of this to Pilate, but to what point? Consider how often we demand to be heard when no one wants to hear what we have to say. Pearls before swine. But why would you ask the prisoner what he has done? Instead of a direct answer, Yeshua explained that his kingdom was not of this world. Otherwise, his supporters would be there fighting for him instead of allowing him to be taken so easily. His is not a rival political power. So Pilate could relax in the knowledge that Rome had nothing to fear from Yeshua, or so he came to believe. Rome's power was based in armed force, pride, human acclaim, the desire for domination, and base self-interest. Yeshua knew that his kingdom would arrive when God planned, and he will rule the whole earth. Every knee will bow, and every tongue proclaim that he is God, and God is King. What is inferred? Yeshua, from another world altogether, could provide truths unknown to Pilate if he's interested. Pilate seems only interested in knowing more about Yeshua's kingship, but he asks a fascinating question. What is truth? Not what is the truth. We know that Pilate despised the Jewish people. He hated his position in this downcast nation, yet here was a Jew persecuted by his own because he said he was a king. Yeshua said he was not the kind of king Pilate knew anything about. He's the king of truth. It was the truth that Yeshua wanted Pilate to recognize. And for this, he was born into the world. The only truth Pilate really understood was armed power. Armed power. The power of Rome. People today ask the same sort of question, but most understand truth only on the basis of personal preference or as conditional. From this conversation, Pilate knew that Yeshua was no threat to Rome, so he could be released. He went and spoke with the religious leaders, telling them that he found no fault with Yeshua. Yeshua was guilty of nothing for which he should be executed. He knew Yeshua was innocent. Thus, he tried to use a custom of releasing someone at Pesach in order to have Yeshua released, asking them if they would like him to release the King of the Jews. This was like a red rag to a bull, and the crowd, already primed, according to Matthew 27, demanded that he release Barabbas, a known thief, a zealot, and possibly a murderer, instead of Yeshua. Pilate was not happy, although he was not a particularly moral man. He was uncomfortable about executing someone obviously innocent. But in the end, he gave in because it was prudent for him to do so. Shalom and blessings. I'll see you next week.